On a warm December morning in 1834, the rolling hills of Virginia shimmered with golden light. Dew clung to the grass like scattered diamonds, and a soft breeze carried the scent of tobacco and magnolia across the land. At the center of this picturesque landscape stood the Hargrove Plantation, a sprawling estate that seemed plucked from a romantic painting. Locals called it Heaven's Gate, and from a distance, that name made perfect sense. The plantation's Greek Revival mansion gleamed with white columns and ivy-covered balconies, a proud symbol of Southern wealth and aristocracy. Neatly aligned rows of tobacco stretched beyond the horizon, guarded by willow trees and fenced with hand-carved railings. Travelers and visitors often paused their carriages to admire the estate. Guests were greeted with polite smiles, sweet tea, and the sort of Southern hospitality that masked every imperfection. But as beautiful as it appeared, Hargrove Plantation harbored secrets. Its grandeur was a carefully constructed illusion, one meant to distract from the quiet suffering of the people who made it thrive. The Hargrove family had lived on that land for generations. Colonel Thaddeus Hargrove, a stern man known for his commanding presence and gleaming silver-tipped cane, was the current head of the household. A former military man turned plantation magnate, he was feared as much as he was respected. His wife, Lucinda, was a woman of poise and mystery, regarded as the epitome of refinement by the local gentry. Together, they had 3 sons who had been educated in Europe, each returning with foreign ideas and polished manners. From church pews to county balls, the Hargroves were considered the moral and economic backbone of Larkspur County. To outsiders, they were God-fearing, generous benefactors, offering employment, donating to the local church, and hosting elaborate harvest festivals for white neighbors and business partners. But to those who labored on the plantation, the enslaved men, women, and especially the children, the family was something else entirely. Whispers floated through the quarters like dust in the sunlight, and the whispers spoke of disappearances. It began with small things, unusual noises in the orchards late at night, the sound of crying when no one was there, and flickering candlelight seen moving near the family mausoleum long after midnight. The enslaved community tried to ignore it, but soon the unthinkable began to happen. Young girls, always under 13, began to vanish. One by one, they disappeared without warning or explanation. Mabel, a lively kitchen hand, vanished overnight. No signs of escape. No sale paperwork. No answers. Then came Sally, a quiet girl who worked polishing silver in the main house. She had been seen that evening, eyes full of hope as she hummed a hymn to herself. By morning, she was gone. The Hargroves offered no explanations, and no one dared press for one. But Reverend Elijah Pritchard, a visiting preacher known for his compassion, began to suspect something was wrong. During a Sunday luncheon with the Hargroves, he gently questioned Lucinda about the growing rumors. Her smile faltered for the briefest moment before she answered, "Children are fickle, especially those with no proper roots." Her tone was cool, final. Still, the Reverend wrote a discreet letter to a local magistrate in the town of Larkspur, requesting a quiet investigation. Weeks passed with no reply. Meanwhile, 2 more girls were gone. Their names were never mentioned again, as if they'd never existed. Among the enslaved, fear turned to superstition. Tales began to surface, tales of secret ceremonies, of blood markings found near the chapel basement, of the mausoleum being used not to bury the dead, but to commune with something far darker. Some said the Hargrove family had made a pact, a blood oath exchanged generations ago to preserve their fortune in return for sacrifices. And just as the rumors grew bolder, a new figure arrived at the estate. A man from the north named Samuel Dunleavy, who had left his past behind and sought honest work. Hired as an assistant overseer, Samuel quickly earned a reputation for fairness and kindness. He treated the enslaved not as property, but as people. And though they remained cautious, they began to trust him. It didn't take long before Samuel noticed something wasn't right. The plantation's work records were full of inconsistencies. Young girls would appear on rosters and then disappear without explanation. When Samuel inquired, he was brushed off with vague replies about transfers and illnesses. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something more sinister was happening. One night, while checking the supply shed, Samuel uncovered a hidden door beneath a pile of crates. What he found beneath would begin to unravel the very soul of the plantation. Samuel Dunleavy stood in the dusty, dimly lit cellar, heart pounding. The ledger he held felt heavier than any book should, its pages filled with names, dates, and chilling phrases like given, purged, and prepared. These weren't ordinary plantation records. These were something else entirely. He turned the pages slowly, carefully. Many of the names matched those whispered among the enslaved as the missing. One name leapt out, Sally, the same young girl who had vanished weeks before without explanation. Every entry was dated by moon phases rather than months, suggesting a pattern, a ritual. The dates were spaced just far enough apart to avoid attention, but consistent enough to imply intention. These weren't random disappearances. Someone had planned this. Someone had recorded every detail. Samuel carefully closed the ledger and tucked it under his coat, heart racing with the weight of what he now knew. He had come to Hargrove Plantation for honest work and a quiet life, but now found himself caught in a web of shadows thicker than any he'd ever imagined. As he emerged from the cellar, he looked around, suddenly hyper-aware of every movement and every gaze that might be watching. That night, he barely slept. He locked his door and placed the ledger beneath his bed, trying to understand what he had found. He recalled the faint sound of footsteps outside his quarters, the creak of wood from down the hall, and the unsettling silence that followed. He wasn't just imagining things anymore. Something was very wrong at Hargrove. At dawn, he made a decision. If he couldn't go directly to the authorities, especially given the Hargroves' deep connections, he would speak with someone who might help from within. Thomas Gray, the plantation's longtime steward. Thomas was respected by both the Hargrove family and the workers. He was known to be just, quiet, and observant, a man who had managed the day-to-day affairs of the plantation for over 2 decades. Samuel believed that if anyone had noticed the disappearances and wasn't complicit, it would be Thomas. But when Samuel reached Thomas's quarters, something was off. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, everything looked undisturbed, too undisturbed. The bed was neatly made, clothes still folded, boots still at the foot of the bed. A teacup sat half full, untouched for hours. There were no signs of a struggle, but also no sign of Thomas. It was as if he had simply vanished. That was the moment Samuel realized he was truly alone. Still, he couldn't walk away. He started watching more carefully, how the Hargrove sons moved at night, the locked doors in the east wing of the mansion, the way Lucinda would hum softly as she passed the family chapel at dusk. One evening, hidden behind a hedge near the mausoleum, he saw the colonel himself enter the crypt alone with a lantern. He remained inside for nearly an hour. When he emerged, his expression was unreadable, but he walked straighter, as though energized. The next morning, word spread. Another girl, Eliza, had gone missing. Samuel tried to speak with the Reverend again, but the preacher had stopped visiting the plantation. According to gossip, he had suddenly left for a sabbatical, no farewell sermon, no final blessing. Rumor had it that he had fallen ill, but Samuel had seen the man just 2 weeks prior, strong and healthy. Fear gripped the plantation. Even the children played in silence. The older women clutched talismans and whispered prayers not found in any Bible. The field hands kept their heads down. The kitchen staff cried silently over their pots. No one would speak openly, but everyone knew. And then late one night, Samuel noticed movement near the east orchard. He followed at a distance, his footsteps masked by the crunch of dried leaves. There, just past the old smokehouse, a hooded figure carried something limp over their shoulder, a small form, wrapped in linen. Samuel's stomach turned. He didn't follow. He couldn't. The truth was unbearable. Something evil had taken root at Hargrove, a legacy of power built on ritual, secrecy, and blood. He returned to his quarters and stared at the ledger by candlelight. The entries stopped 2 pages from the end. There was room for more names. He wondered if his would be next. By the following morning, Samuel Dunleavy knew he couldn't wait any longer. The plantation was a powder keg of secrets, fear, and whispers, and he had already seen too much. The missing steward, the hidden ledger, the midnight figure in the orchard. Each detail added weight to his growing suspicion that the Hargrove family was involved in something not only evil, but methodical. But there was one place no one spoke about directly, one place where the whispers always stopped, the basement chapel beneath the mansion. It was a strange thing for a plantation to have. While many southern estates had parlors or libraries used for prayer, the Hargrove mansion had a full chapel hidden beneath its foundation, built, according to legend, by Colonel Hargrove's grandfather, who claimed to have spoken with angels after a terrible fever nearly took his life. Over the years, the chapel had grown in myth and mystery. The enslaved were never allowed near it. Even the house staff were forbidden to clean it. Lucinda Hargrove, it was said, performed her daily devotions there alone, and the colonel entered only on certain moonlit nights. Samuel had never seen it up close, but now he had to. That evening, after most of the plantation settled into silence, he slipped out of his quarters and crept toward the mansion. The east wing back door, which he knew was often left unlocked by careless staff, gave him quiet entry. He moved cautiously through the halls, candle in hand, avoiding the creaky boards he had memorized during his months on the estate. He found the door to the chapel concealed behind an old bookcase in a servant's corridor. The lock was rusted and barely held. With a careful tug, it gave way. Samuel descended the stone steps, the air growing colder with each step. The smell was the first thing he noticed, old incense, damp earth, and something metallic beneath it all. Blood, perhaps. The chapel was small and dimly lit by old iron sconces that hadn't held candles in years. The walls were adorned with crude religious carvings, some Christian, but others that Samuel couldn't recognize. An altar stood at the far end, stained and scarred. Behind it, a large wooden cross had been mounted to the wall, but it wasn't Christ who hung from it. It was a faceless figure carved in black wood, arms bent downward instead of outstretched, and beneath it were rows of bones. Human bones. Samuel staggered back, bile rising in his throat. He had heard of dark rituals, rumors in northern taverns, stories dismissed as frontier madness. But he never imagined such horrors could exist beneath the home of Virginia aristocracy. He moved toward the altar, drawn by a strange compulsion, and found another ledger resting on a nearby table. This one wasn't just names. It was a diary. It had been written by Lucinda Hargrove. The entries were chilling. One spoke of offerings under the dying moon, another of preserving the family's legacy through sacred bonds. She wrote of the founding of the plantation, of ancient rights passed down through her bloodline, of power granted in exchange for innocence. There were drawings, crude and disturbing, of the rituals and the tools used in them. Samuel turned to the last page. It was dated just 2 days prior. The child tonight is strong. Her voice trembled the hymns, but she will serve. The others are pleased. Thomas grew suspicious, and he was removed. Samuel watches more closely. I fear he will need to be included. Samuel's blood turned to ice. They knew. They knew he had been watching. They knew what he had seen. Suddenly, a sound echoed through the chapel, soft footsteps on the stairs. He snatched the diary and ducked behind a pillar, extinguishing his candle. The footsteps paused near the altar. A voice, low, familiar, female, began to hum. The same tune Lucinda had been humming days earlier. He held his breath as she walked slowly to the altar, her fingers grazing the bones as if in prayer. Then, without warning, she turned and whispered, "Come out, Samuel." He didn't move. "You've seen enough," she said calmly. "Now you understand. This land demands what is owed." She turned and began ascending the stairs. Her voice echoed behind her. "You will not leave. Not yet. The bloodline must be preserved." And then she was gone. Samuel remained frozen behind the pillar for what felt like hours. When he finally emerged, the chapel was quiet once more. But something had shifted. The walls seemed darker. The air felt heavier. He now knew the truth. The question was, could he escape with it? Samuel didn't sleep that night. How could he? The diary he had stolen now lay hidden beneath the loose floorboard in his modest quarters. Each word burned into his mind: rituals, sacrifices, bloodlines, and the horrifying truth about what had happened to the missing girls. And Thomas Gray, a good man, silenced, removed, as Lucinda had written. Samuel was next. Dawn broke slowly over the plantation, but the sun did little to comfort him. Every glance from a servant, every polite nod from a field overseer, now felt loaded with suspicion. Did they know? Were they watching him? He had to leave, but he had to do it smartly. Running blindly would lead him straight into the woods, or worse, into the Hargroves' hands. They owned the land, the roads, the men at the gates. Even the town of Larkspur owed much of its prosperity to the family's tobacco fortune. If he vanished, no one would ask questions. The same way no one asked about Thomas, or Sally, or Mabel. Samuel decided he needed help. He couldn't trust anyone in the big house. But there was one man, Elijah, an older enslaved man who worked as a blacksmith and had always looked at Samuel with quiet understanding. If anyone knew how to move unnoticed through the estate, it would be him. That afternoon, Samuel faked a twisted ankle and limped to the forge, clutching his side in exaggerated pain. He waited until the other workers were gone for supper, then approached Elijah as he hammered at a horseshoe. "I need your help," Samuel said under his breath. Elijah didn't look up. "I figured you would. You've been nosing around places no man should go." Samuel's breath caught. "So you know." "I know what they do," Elijah replied, setting down his hammer. "I seen too many young ones disappear. The land drinks their blood, Mr. Dunleavy. Has for generations." Samuel glanced around. "I have proof. A diary. Names. Rituals." "That won't matter much if you end up like Thomas," Elijah said, finally looking him in the eye. "They bury more than just bodies around here. They bury truth." Samuel nodded. "Then help me get out. Tonight. Before they know I'm gone." Elijah hesitated, then gave a single nod. "There's an old route. Slavers used it in reverse, back when men tried to run north. It runs through the swamp east of the cotton grove. You'll need to move fast and silent. They got dogs, and those beasts don't forget a scent." Samuel leaned closer. "What about the gates?" "You won't need 'em," Elijah said. "You ain't leaving the way you came in. But I can get you a horse. Might not be fast, but she's sure-footed." That night, the air was thick with humidity and unease. Samuel packed only essentials, water, the diary, and a small pistol he'd hidden for emergencies. Just before midnight, he slipped out toward the forge, where Elijah waited with the mare. She was old and dappled gray, with a saddle worn but secure. "You sure you want to do this?" Elijah asked as he helped Samuel mount. "I can't let them keep doing this," Samuel replied. "Someone needs to know. Someone needs to stop it." Elijah nodded. "Ride straight. Don't stop till you see the cypress trees. Then head north. There's a preacher out there, name of Wickham. He knows about the Hargroves. Maybe he'll help." Samuel gripped the reins. "Thank you, Elijah, for everything." The old man gave a sad smile. "You ain't the first to try. Just be the first to make it." With a final glance at the grand house, its windows glowing like watching eyes, Samuel nudged the mare forward. She trotted softly through the rows of cotton, then veered east toward the dark outline of the swamp. Behind him, the plantation slept, or pretended to. But as Samuel vanished into the trees, a single figure stood at an upper window of the mansion, candle in hand. Lucinda Hargrove. She smiled. Samuel rode deep into the black woods of Virginia, the mare's hooves muffled by layers of pine needles and mud. The swamp air was thick with the cries of night creatures and the low croak of bullfrogs. But Samuel heard none of it. His mind raced ahead, past the trees, past the fear, toward a single name, Preacher Wickham. Elijah had said the man lived beyond the swamp, near a forgotten mission outpost, once used to convert native tribes. The place had long since decayed into obscurity, but Whitcomb remained. He knew about the Hargroves, Elijah claimed. He'd seen what they were capable of. He might be the only man who could help. Samuel rode until dawn. The sun broke through the mossy canopy just as he spotted a clearing. There, amid crumbling stone walls and overgrown wildflowers, stood a chapel, its cross half fallen, ivy strangling its bell tower. Smoke rose faintly from a chimney tucked behind the church. Samuel dismounted and knocked on the weathered wooden door. It opened slowly, revealing a gaunt man with sharp eyes and a white beard. He looked Samuel up and down, then said, "You came from Heaven's Gate." Samuel nearly collapsed with relief. "Elijah sent me. I have proof. They're killing children, sacrificing them. I found a ledger." Whitcomb stepped aside. "Come in. Quickly. We don't have much time." Inside, the chapel was sparse, but clean. Whitcomb lit a lantern and motioned for Samuel to sit at a worn table. As Samuel recounted everything, the basement chapel, the hidden trunk, the diary, the disappearances, Whitcomb listened in silence, nodding occasionally. "I feared it hadn't ended," the preacher said finally. "I tried once. Years ago. Gathered documents, testimonies. Tried to bring it before the court in Larkspur. You know what they did?" He lifted his sleeve, revealing a scar that ran from wrist to elbow. "They sent men in the night, burned the evidence, branded me a madman. I've lived in exile ever since." Samuel pulled the diary from his satchel. "They didn't get this." Whitcomb's eyes narrowed. He took the book gently and flipped through its pages. "Lucinda's hand," he muttered, "cold and precise, like a scientist recording lab specimens." He shut the book. "This changes things. With this, maybe we can finally expose them." But just as the words left his mouth, a horse whinnied in the distance. Whitcomb froze. "They've followed you," he said grimly. Samuel rushed to the window. 3 riders emerged from the trees, men in dark coats with rifles slung across their backs. One of them was Gideon Hargrove, the eldest son. "They'll kill us," Samuel said, backing away. "Not if we burn it first," Whitcomb replied. He grabbed the diary and stuffed it beneath a loose floorboard. "They'll search us, ransack the place. But they won't find what they're truly after. You, however," he handed Samuel a canvas bag, "must leave. Through the cellar. There's a tunnel beneath the church. It leads to a creek. Follow it north." Samuel hesitated. "I can't leave you." Whitcomb's expression softened. "You must. I've lived my life. Yours is just beginning. And the truth, this truth, must live longer than both of us." Voices shouted outside. Fists pounded on the chapel door. Samuel turned and disappeared down the stone stairs to the cellar. Moments later, the chapel door burst open. 3 months later, Washington, D.C. The front page of the National Tribune ran a stunning headline. "Plantation Horror. Exposé reveals Hargrove family's secret rituals and disappearances." An anonymous informant had provided a diary, sworn testimonies, and a map of hidden tunnels beneath the Hargrove mansion. Investigators raided the estate, uncovering shallow graves behind the mausoleum and iron shackles in the basement chapel. The public was horrified. Lucinda Hargrove was arrested, but never made it to trial. She drank poison in her cell, leaving behind only a cryptic note. Heaven's Gate was never meant for the living. Of the sons, 2 fled the country. Gideon was caught in Baltimore and later hanged. The Hargrove name, once celebrated across Virginia, was scrubbed from monuments and books. The mansion burned to the ground under mysterious circumstances a year later. Samuel Dunleavy disappeared from public life. Rumors claimed he moved west under a new name. Some said he became a preacher himself, others that he never stopped hunting hidden evils. But in the National Archives, sealed inside a leather box, rests Lucinda's diary, with one note attached. This is what Heaven's Gate truly held. And beneath it, in Samuel's own hand. So we never forget.